All right, I think everyone's joined. If not, a few latecomers, I think we might get started. So, joined tonight by Emma, wonderful Emma Cookson, uh, who's dialing in from Melbourne. Welcome, Emma. And then we've got the wonderful Angus MacRaild. Hopefully, I pronounced it right.
Yeah.
Whisky Sponge. I will let him do the formal introductions and we'll get into it. But yeah, Angus, we've been big fans of your whiskey down here in Australia for a long time. We're finally starting to bring some in, and very excitingly, a shipment that we couldn't get in time for this tasting, but it's other whiskies from your range, which we'll chat a bit later tonight, have just arrived. So I've put them up on the website as well. You'll all have first access at the end of the tasting to buy any of those whiskies before we release to the general public. So that's it for my sort of formal introductions. I think everyone's joined who will. So Angus, over to you. Welcome, mate. Thanks for joining our second official Whisky Sponge tasting here.
Thanks, Oliver. Thank you to everyone for coming out tonight. It's nice to see you all, and it's heartening to know that there's enthusiasm for our bottlings over on the other side of the world. So yeah, I'm Angus MacRaild, and I'm the head of products, which is a very boring job title for Decadent Drinks. I very specifically wanted a boring job title because I'm not a fan of this Elon Musk-esque master of coin bullshit. So yeah, so I am in charge of doing the bottlings, the label designs, choosing the whiskies, writing the rear labels, all these sorts of things. So and obviously I've written the Whisky Sponge blog for a number of years, which is what inspired the bottling series. None of this was planned. It's been a completely kind of organic, haphazard, stumbling in the dark, finding our way sort of process, and has, as you can imagine and see from the website and the list of things we've bottled, has kind of grown into a bit of a monster and is now well out of control, and we've hired people, and everything's just, yeah, going crazy. So that's good. It's good fun. I never expected to be doing independent bottling, but I'm having a lot of fun doing it. And it's always a pleasure when that sort of thing ends up connecting you with other fellow whiskey lovers around the world like this. So I'll just kick off straight away. First thing we're going to taste tonight is the Old Pulteney. And this is a different series to our Whisky Sponge series. Let me just grab my bottle of it. So when we do Sponge, obviously it's all very, very silly and surreal and occasionally satirical and lots of fun. But I wanted to do something which was a little bit more serious, because at heart, I am essentially just a great big airy-fairy hippie who likes nature and traipsing through the woods and artwork and writing and all these sorts of things. So I wanted to do a series which paired together natural malt whiskies, the sort of malt whiskies which I am a fan of for drinking, which is just very natural profile, close to the raw ingredients, elegant, and quite evocative of a place. So even though I'm not talking here about terroir, but I'm talking about whiskies which, when you taste them, make you think, oh yeah, I can sort of feel like I'm on the Eastern Highlands, or this makes me think I'm sitting on Islay sipping a Kalila. Yeah. So that kind of feeling, that kind of like mood whiskies, if you like. So this is where the series Equinox and Solstice came in. Being quite north in the Northern Hemisphere, seasons are quite noticeable here. So I like the idea of whiskies that we could do four of, so we do 4 bottlings a year, each one released on their respective equinox or solstice date throughout the calendar. And the flavor profiles of each whiskey selected to pair with or express that kind of mood that goes with each season. So this is where Equinox and Solstice came in. We get a different artist each year to create 4 original artworks which form the labels. So each year there's a sense of kind of identity to the whole complete set. So we did the 2021 series, and now we're on to the 2022 series. And I think so far I'm quite happy with the way the series has gone. All the whiskies are bottled at 48.5%, 48.5 being the strength that I think works really well for most spirits as a kind of halfway house between lower, more reduced levels, which give you, quite an easy soft profile, and something a bit higher alcohol, which carries over a bit more weight and power. So it's that kind of perfect sweet spot, I think. It's actually equivalent to, in the old money, 85 proof, which was used for a lot of bottlings of malt whiskey in the 60s and 50s. And being formerly kind of, or still, I suppose, working with old and rare whiskies a lot, it was just kind of a nod to that. That's why I like that strength. So this Pulteney, it's 3 barrels married together. It's two, I can't even remember what I've done now. 2 first fill barrels and 1 refill barrel. So you've got enough sweetness from the wood there that's, you know, matching well with the kind of natural barley sweetness in the distillate, and the refill barrel brings a nice bit of freshness to balance that out. So it's not too much about the wood. You've got a lot of nice Pulteney distillery character in there. I always think Pulteney is one of those whiskies which still retains quite a bit of personality. I think you still taste it and you often get the sense, yeah, this feels like a sort of proper Highland malt whiskey as opposed to a Speyside or just a homogenized general mainland Scottish mush that a lot of whiskies taste like now. It actually has some personality, some bones, some structure. This one I think is a good example. For me, it feels very fresh, quite chalky, quite coastal, even a little hint of something medicinal in there. And again, for me, these are not whiskies that are designed to be poured into nosing glasses and overanalyzed, although you can do that in a tasting like this. It's a sort of whiskey that I think this is, you know, put your slippers on, play your favorite album, or sit with some pals around a table and just have big, you know, large dram measures in tumbler glasses and just sit and sip and put the world to rights. And that's the kind of whiskies that I've tried to create for this series. So it's not rocket salad. It's not super complicated. It's just something which is meant to be simple, very pleasurable, easy. And, you know, it's something that, like with all we do, and this is something we can apply to everything we're doing at the moment, and all the bottlings we'll talk about tonight, is you're just putting whiskey in a bottle. It's not difficult. It's not complicated. Although actually, that's a lie. It is very surprisingly complicated to do independent bottling, and I advise all of you never to get involved in it because it's really stressful. But yeah, putting whiskey into a bottle, what else can you do with that process apart from make sure the inside content is ticked and is good quality? What can you do with the labels? So, you know, I like the idea that people would open a bottle like this, enjoy it over time, and then you can keep the empty bottle on your shelf as a memento. You've got a nice bit of artwork. There's something vaguely highfalutin and airy-fairy and, you know, nonsensy for me on the back label, like some sort of mini Ponzi essay that you can read and perhaps think about stuff while you're dramming. So it's just trying to go the extra mile, trying to think of ways to use, you know, your vessel, if you like, and the sort of minimalist packaging that comes with that to add something extra to the overall experience of buying and owning a nice bottle of whiskey.
Well, a couple of questions, Angus, for you to get started, and then people got questions, just feel free to chime in. We've got a pretty small audience tonight, so if you want to ask it in person, just raise your hand and I'll unmute you as well. What I was going to say, I love the artwork. I love the concept of you doing the seasons and everything. Is because all your other bottles we're tasting are mostly single casks or blends of, you know, 1 or 2 bottlings. Is there all the Equinox bottlings always a blend?
They're always a small batch. Apart from the winter one we did last year, we did a Cognac 2006, which was just a single cask first fill sherry hogshead. But generally they're 2 or 3 casks together. The idea behind the series is that if we could over time grow it, we can you know, increase the volume. I mean, this is what I mean. You know, it's very easy to pick, like, oh, this single cask tastes delicious, let's put it in a bottle. Hey, you know, we're independent bottlers. Long term, I would really like to get a bit more into doing slightly larger batch products where there's a bit more design and creativity goes into the process of pulling all those casks together. So, you know, but to do that, we need our own warehouse, and it's all some way down the line. But and it's also much harder to sell those products. You know, despite what all the whiskey bloggers in the world keep saying about, we just want affordable, delicious whiskeys. Like, no, you all want fucking single casks that you can flip. Don't lie. Everyone wants single cask, named single malts, which are bottled at a reasonably attractive price, which they can put on their shelf, and maybe they can open it, but if they don't, they can possibly sell it. That's what people want. And it's just all fibs, because you put out a product like this and it doesn't fly off the shelf. You know, it takes a bit of sales work, takes a bit of time. This idea that whiskey just sells itself and it's a bit of a fantasy, I think. But yeah, long term, I'd like to do more stuff like this, and I'd like to, in a few years' time, hopefully with a bit more growth of this brand. I'd like to be able to see doing maybe 4 or 5 casks and taking casks from different vintages. And I'll always try to make sure there's a named single malt on the label, but I like the idea of being able to play with that a bit more. So that to me is what's interesting. That's where the creativity in doing independent bottling lies. Whiskey is for drinking, not investing or reselling. I mean, so there's a lot of that sentiment around. I just think the one of the reasons whiskey has grown as a product in a market is because there's so much more diverse interests, often conflicting interests at play, and that's what there's people buying whiskey undeniably because they see it as an investable asset, and that's, in some ways, that's been good because it's made room for a lot more jobs and a lot more bottlings. And there's a great, if you're a drinker and you've got, say, £100 to spend on a bottle of whiskey, there's never been a greater diversity of things out there for you to go and spend that £100 on. But from our perspective, it's put the price of casks way up. It puts the price of bottlings for the consumer up as a result. It squeezes margins. It has a lot of there's a lot of complex things going on at the moment in whiskey. And yeah, so I think whatever your ideology about it, it's probably correct for you, but it's very hard to simplify anything that's going on in whiskey right now, I would say.
And then as an importer and distributor, we've got excise. Australia is wonderful, all the costs of shipping, air freighting the stock over. So we're doing our best to keep these products, and there will be some sponges later on available tonight to sell, as affordable to everyone. It's just the demand is shocking. Like, we've shipments 3-4 months late, but we can go about that forever. I wanted to go back to this old Pulteney. I'm getting the coastal freshness that you mentioned, but this to me is the most nuttiest old Pulteney I've ever had.
Yeah, I mean, I find a lot of cereal character in it. This is what I mean by natural profile malt whiskies. I like whiskies where you taste them, you get down into the raw DNA of the ingredients. You get kind of like that almost sourdough yeastiness, which you feel like there's a sort of leftover bits of fermentation somehow still going on, and you taste raw barley and cereals and toast. Nuttiness, I'm not dramming them because I've got to drive later on, but I think probably something like crushed hazelnuts or something I seem to remember getting that in it when I was trying it before.
I'm on halfway through my bottle, so maybe it gets slightly more of that bottle, that note.
I will say it's still got that core like milk bottle lolly thing that old Pulteney tends to have, that like creaminess that is sweet but not super sweet.
I know what you mean. That milk lollies and milk bottle sweeties. I often find those profiles in whiskey, although I'm reticent sometimes to use them in tasting notes, because I think if I just wrote tasting notes for all the stuff that I get, it would be just literally a British child from a pick and mix counter most of the time, and it would not translate to anyone overseas. So yeah, should we go into the Jura?
Yes, please.
Absolutely.
Cool. So this was one of my favorite of our recent bottlings. This is a Jura, and it's 27 years old, but it's a multi-vintage. So it's a mix of 2 casks, a 1994 refill hogshead and a 1991 refill barrel. And the reason for doing these is again, this is coming back to what I was talking about before about I just like making potions and playing around with recipes. And I think that bringing together 2 casks often creates a whiskey which is greater than the sum of its parts. So these 2 casks on their own, so the 1994 refill barrel was very austere, quite drying, quite pure, and almost a little too kind of dry and peppery and singular. Whereas the barrel, the 1991 barrel, the wood influence had gone a bit too far, and it was almost getting into this like pine resin, fir wood, a bit too kind of sweet and spicy. So each cask had something that the other one needed, and putting them together, I think, created a really elegantly balanced dram. And the overall profile of this Jura is one that I love, which is kind of, I would describe it as old style coastal highlands. So really west coast of Scotland, highlands. It's waxy, it's oily, it's quite dry, and it's almost like I think of like aged dry white wines when I have it, like Chenin Blanc, Riesling, these kind of wines where you get this almost like honey and butter on warm toast kind of vibe. And as in there's still also these little coastal inflections that make you think of island whiskies. It's a style I love. It's quite intricate. It's quite a complex sort of grown-up style of whiskey, despite an incredibly childish and silly label. It's quite, it's a style of whiskey which is quite hard to find nowadays. So I was really pleased with how the whiskey turned out. I also think that because of the way this is bottled, this came from Signatory stock, so the way they do it is literally just to dump the two casks together in a tank and then sort of stir it up a bit, and then it goes straight into bottle. So I think there's still a lot of interaction happening in the bottle. And I think this whiskey will be one that will evolve quite interestingly over the next sort of 10 to 15 years. So this is why, there's a number of our whiskies I keep some bottles of if I can. Usually try and get at least one extra or something, and then I'll keep it aside and open it 20 years hence and see what has become of it, because I do believe that whiskies do evolve and bottle a little bit, and that they certainly can settle down and become more balanced and more harmonious and complex in bottle over time. So that's something I'm interested to see how it develops. But yeah, I'm really happy with this bottling, and I think it's a great example of Jura. I think Jura is, when it's natural like this and with a good amount of age behind it, beautiful distillate. I think that the owners kind of spoil it a bit sometimes with all this, 7 wood. I mean, why not just call it a golf club or something? But like the amount of caramel wood filtration that obfuscates the natural distillery character is a bit of a shame for the official bottlings, because even younger casks I've had recently, we tried some 2010 refilled butts recently, and really good whiskey, just nice, charismatic, rich, distillate-driven whiskey. So I thought this was really good. And there's lots of quite good indie bottlings of these early 90s batches. I think there was a bunch of stock hit the market a couple of years ago, and they've been filtering through. So quite a few people have had good bottlings of this stock. So
I was actually going to ask anyone here who's having their first indie Jura tonight. Okay, we got a couple. It's not the most loved or sought after brand, OB brand in Australia. Society have done a few really old Juras before, I know that, and they've been quite popular, but it's actually great to bring this one in and crack it open and try it. I don't think I've ever had a 27-year-old Jura like that in Hidden Spirits. Thank you, Keenan.
Yeah, the 21-year-old Jura from Hidden Spirits, which was probably the last old natural Jura in Australia, independently bottled.
Yeah, it's good whiskey, and people forget that. I think it's had this is a phenomena which is so true of so many distilleries these days, which is that the indie bottlers seem to release truer, more kind of natural examples of these malts than the owners do. And you can say the same of probably Highland Park, Lefroy, Bowmore, lots and lots of big name, well-known, well-loved whiskies. You get a more honest representation of their distillery character from independent bottlers. I mean, fair enough, indie bottlers are usually just doing single casks or a couple of casks, cask strength, and bottlers are doing these huge big batches, and they've got these sort of commercial imperative to do funky things with finishing and all this stuff. So I understand, but it's quite interesting how pronounced that phenomena seems to be sometimes. Anyway, I'm pleased to see there's some good positive feedback on this one. I like this one a lot. I think it's one of my favorite recent bottlings, because it was one where we made quite a clear conscious decision. Now let's mix these two casks together, different ages, different cask types, and the result has been good. Sometimes you do that and you're playing around with cask samples at home and the result is not what you expect, because playing around with cask samples and trying to gauge 2 cl of this and 1.5 cl of this should make something approximate to what we'll get, and no. It's quite a haphazard process unless you've got a lab and your own warehouse. It's quite hard to do these things accurately.
You got a question there, Tristan, or are you just playing on the kitty?
So cute.
You're on mute, mate.
Yeah. Why is there so many old Juras out at the moment? Like, there's tons of them. There's like connoisseur's choice and stuff. Gordon MacPhail got about 6 bottles, and like everyone's got like old malt casks. It's like every indie bottler's got about 2 or 3, whereas you go back a year or 2 ago, there was nothing.
Yeah, this happens every few years. You know, that essentially what will happen probably is White and Mackay will have needed some cash at the end of a year, so they'll have put together a parcel of stock which they'll have dumped onto the brokers market, and then the brokers will end up selling this through their network of clients, and they end up inevitably at the indie bottlers. So Gordon MacPhail signatory would have bought a lot, and then parcels went out to other brokers like Bartels, etc. And then from there they go to people like us and, you know, other contemporary bottlers. You know, Thompson Brothers have had a few casks, you know, Hidden Spirits, you know, all these people, as we've already mentioned, there's lots of Juras out there. So it's all that 1 or 2 big parcels of stock that originally White and Mackay would have sold into the market, and they're just drip feeding through. A few years ago, same thing happened with Little Mill. There was a small parcel of 2000 unnamed Klein Leash as well, about a year and a half ago. And there'll be something else coming, you know, around the corner. And it's a bit unfortunate because it means that a lot of the bottlers end up having similar stocks at the same time. And it's why I decide to sometimes mix things together, because I think it's a way to help create a bit of, you know, unique identity in our bottling, and that, you know, this is something different that you can only get from us. And it's true even if you bottle a single cask, that's also true. But, you know, trying to just go the extra mile to add a little bit of uniqueness is what we're always looking. We're always looking at where's the space for us to do that, and that's what happened with this Jura. So what's next in the lineup is the Bruichladdich next.
Can we very quickly touch on the label?
Yeah,
because this is one of the coolest
Greatest.
labels, I think, in your range, at least the recent one. So we've got the Caramel Kraken, I believe it's called, being sprayed with the E150. You want to give a little bit of inspiration? What's the story behind this one?
Well, so this is essentially just taking the piss out of the fact that Jura has far too much caramel in it, and just the idea that Richard Patterson was a huge Leviathan sea monster emerging from the sea to terrorize the people of Jura and demand that they slake his lust for E150 by mining caramel from the mines of Jura. It seemed pretty obvious to me. I had originally thought of a label where there was a sort of, let's just say there was more of a like caramel bukkake vibe in my head, but we ended up opting for this route instead. So it's always about compromise, you know. There's always somewhere.
Definitely not related to Scotch Whisky Association labeling rules. Definitely no.
Oh,
no.
God, don't get me started on the labeling rules. I mean, I'm all for a lot of you know, SWA rules and regs around production, but the labeling rules are, I don't know. I don't like going through life living with a fear of offending anyone. Like, we can't do this because we might offend someone. Like, you know. Anyway, let's not get started on that subject. We'll be here for
all right, take us through the laddie.
So Bruichladdich. So this was just a single cask that we were fortunate enough to acquire, and I just loved it. I love Bruichladdich from these vintages. This is one of the very first distillation runs in 2001 when Mark Rainier and co took over Bruichladdich and reopened it. And when they were doing these batches, they did some initial, like, quite lightly peated runs at about 10 parts per million phenol. So in this whiskey, I think you can taste that there's a little bit of peat going on. And this whiskey, these batches now at this kind of age, I think the profile is just beautiful. There's a lovely, really clean first fill bourbon barrel. And the first fill bourbon, you know, obviously quite a bit of wood influence, but it's really matched well with the distillate. That little thread of peat in there, it just has turned into this beautiful, like, piney, mentholated, medicinal, coastal, and quite waxy style of whiskey. To me, I find it quite reminiscent of some late 70s, early 80s Broras. So it's really got a kind of cool old style vibe about it. And obviously 2001 riffing on that with the label, which so any excuse to do sci-fi references, jump on that with Whisky Sponge. And this was just I thought a really great single cask. So bottled as it is, natural cask strength, and you know, a good opportunity to taste Bruichladdich from these vintages at this kind of age, which I don't think the distillery itself really have stock of that. So it's just the private cask owners that that have kind of, I don't know, kept these casks for that long, or been polite enough to die, and then the casks go to auction and we get them. So so yeah, it's pretty good. I'm very happy with it. I think it's delicious whiskey.
I was going to say it's sensational. Just trying it for the first time, but the back label says something about, oh, you've had some few poor releases. This one you're back to normal enthusiasm, and you jump on Facebook and complain rather than talk about it or something. So,
oh yeah, I mean, so Sponge started out as taking the piss out of the industry, and as time has gone on, I've sort of balanced that by more taking the piss out of whiskey geeks as well, and just trying to kind of spread the piss taking equally across everyone. So yeah, that label in, I don't know, that label in particular is just it's essentially just riffing on, I don't know who owns the copyright to HAL 9000 from 2001 Space Odyssey, but hopefully they're not a whiskey enthusiast and won't sue me. Like some of our early labels would definitely I don't know, like would probably still potentially could get sued by Disney for our Caol Ila edition 13, I think it was, but
they are extra litigious at the moment.
Yeah, I know. I don't know what I was thinking. Yeah, there's been a lot of uphill, very steep learning curves in terms of doing labelings and what you can and can't do. I'm also pretty sure Paul McCartney would sue me for my Blend on the Run label that I did. So yeah, fingers crossed that none of these people are not Whisky Sponge fans. So
20-year-old, 50.9%, one of 161 bottles, first fill bourbon, 2001 distillate to 2021, just reading the label. Another signatory vintage. How come you do so many?
No, this is not signatory, this one came as we bought this privately, I think.
It says SIG on the front.
Does it? What?
It's from the warehouse as a signatory vintage.
Yeah.
But I will say the nose is my favorite pork fat that you get from Bruichladdich sometimes. Oh, so good. I could just smell it.
How on earth did I miss that? All right, that's really bad. That's terrible oversight. I can't believe I've just... That definitely didn't come from signatory. That's really annoying because that gives them credit where it's not due. All right, don't tell anyone.
We won't.
Just keep it between us and no one will notice.
Any tasting notes from the audience? We're getting vanilla from the barrel, a bit of peat on the finish, cereal notes of the barley remain, lovely balanced strain. That's just Leo. Any others chime in? For me, I've just got Derek's latest on Lockendale. Sorry, Derek. This far surpasses. I know different whiskey, different age, whatever it is, but yeah, just trying to get into different IB laddies and stuff. But this is
What's interesting is the character of this is actually quite similar in some ways to the Port Charlottes from the same vintages. Obviously, the peat is higher, but this sense of like farmy, medical herbal peat is quite pronounced in both those makes. And then after like 2003, it sort of disappears a bit. So something was going on in those early vintages that I think was quite special. And the Lockendales, I've not tried too many of them, but I think they're pretty good as well, although they sit in a bit of a funny no man's land between Port Charlotte and Octomore in some ways, but they are very good. I mean, I think I love modern day Bruichladdich. I think they've made some great whiskies.
Leo,
maybe
trying to
flip them. No, well, I don't think they'll be able to, because I think our whiskies are priced too high for flippers.
Yeah, there was that Lecheg bottle with the anti-flipper technology, free water added. I loved that. It's also one of my favorite whiskies, and I'm very upset that Ollie has a bottle and I don't.
You missed out on the Lecheg. All right, well, I don't know. I'm sure that we can. I'll have a look in our archives. Maybe we've got some knocking about.
Everyone in the tasting probably knows I'm one of the biggest Lecheg fans of all time.
That's another one that I tried to get. I tried to do a label for, and it got rejected by SWA because it was considered marketing at children, but just because I'd drawn it in felt tip pen myself, I wanted to try and make it as bad as possible. So I thought I'll do it myself, and they rejected it. So I had to get a professional artist in to make it, you know, I don't know, just
To
the
use
sort of
pop art in Word or
just
something.
yeah, like that sweet spot between dreadful but professionally dreadful.
Yep.
So yeah, that was what that's what we eventually managed to achieve. So this is the thing, at least the regulations force you to think of creative ways around problems, but yeah, it's be very annoying sometimes. So yeah, I love the Bruichladdich. I'm pleased that you all seem to enjoy them. What are we on next? Is it Bowmore next?
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
I think
cool.
if you think it's less peated than the
Yeah,
Caol Ila.
it is. Yeah, the Kalilas are quite beastie. The Bowmore is a bit more elegant and balanced. So the Bowmore is a 2003 refill sherry butt. But what happened is that at some point in its life, it was taken out of this refill sherry butt and was going to be bottled by somebody else, by another customer of Signatories. And that sale, for whatever reason, fell through. So the whiskey was sitting in a vatting tank for ages, like a year and a bit. And when the sale fell through, they put it back into a different refill sherry butt. And so the whiskey had a sort of interrupted aging profile, but it's technically 17 years old. So that's why we didn't put a vintage on the label, but we put, I have a code.
Guaranteed 17 years, yeah.
That sounds like a vintage to me.
Yeah, but then I have a coding system. So if you, under that, it says one of 679 bottles from a refill sherry butt, brackets V03. So whenever you see that on a label, that's just my like cheating way of giving you the vintage. V0301, that just means the vintage in question for that whiskey. So with this one, it was just a nice whiskey. Obviously, I mean, I would bottle Bowmore all day long. I love Bowmore, a beautiful whiskey. I think it's one of those distilleries which has really improved in recent years. I mean, since the 80s, that's recent years for whiskey. It doesn't taste like perfume anymore, which is always a good a shift in the right direction. So yeah, 2003 refill sherry butt, 17 years in wood. And the cask strength of this one was around 55.5%, but I just thought it had a bit more fruitiness with a bit of reduction. So this is another thing that we do, which is again, you know, about trying to find creative, just little ways to put our stamp on a bottling. So targeted reduction is something I'm quite a fan of, because I think there's, you know, a lot of traditional independent bottling is quite kind of ideologically focused on preserving this idea of the single cask, and that's a totally legitimate way to do it. I like a little bit more of an interventionist approach, because my view is that, you know, we're selecting these whiskies, and if you're buying them from us, you're buying into a little bit of our decision making and our kind of ideas about how we like whiskies to be presented. And so targeted bottling is just a way to tweak the whiskey at the end and say, we think it works best at this strength, but at 53%, there's still plenty of room for you to add water yourselves. And so there's just it's a little bit of balance. It's a little bit of a way to, because, you know, with independent bottling, you're essentially just working with a finished product most of the time. So it's just finding a small bit of room in which to be, you know, have a little bit of decision making and stamp a little bit of your own kind of identity on the product. So yeah, 53%. I think it works very well at that strength, and I think the natural fruitiness of Bowmore came out a bit more. And it's one of those casks where, or I suppose two casks, where a light sherry character works very well with that natural sort of medium level peat of Bowmore, quite scented, quite kind of complex, elegant coastal herbal peat, with those sort of subtle dried tropical fruits you often get in Bowmore. So there's those characteristics, and there's nothing dominating. The sherry doesn't dominate, the peat doesn't dominate, the fruit doesn't dominate. So it's all these different things that I think of with Bowmore, but in harmony and in balance. So I thought it was a really lovely cask, a really lovely bottling, and that's why we chose it to do edition 50. So that's a nice round number and nice sort of celebratory whiskey for that bottling.
I was about to say congratulations for 50 bottlings.
I think we've done, I think it's, this edition thing is kind of, it's a bit of a mockery, because I think we've actually done like 94. I'm not sure if that includes all our Armagnacs and cognacs and rums and things yet, but we've definitely done more than 50 whiskies. So yeah, we'll see.
The nose on this Bowmore is exceptional. I could sniff on it for hours or days. It's so inviting.
Yeah, it's got that like classic pineapple that you normally get from Bowmores, but then it's paired with like chocolate and rosemary, so it like takes away any kind of hint that you're in the tropics. It's so good.
I like the fact that when you're having it, it's you can go in all sorts of different directions with it, and it's a whiskey which I think definitely works really well in a good nosing glass, and it is one of those ones. Whereas something like the Pulteney we mentioned earlier, that's for kind of sessionable, not unthinking, switch off your brain dramming. Whereas this is kind of a really intricate, gorgeous, complex whiskey that rewards a bit of time in the glass, nosing, tasting, thinking, really getting to grips with it. And it's a different kind of switch off from the world experience, in my view. Like, I am a firm believer that whiskey should be about fun and pleasure, and that it's designed as something to help you like relax and enjoy life and get away from the kind of stresses and strains of day-to-day living. And that's what that's the overarching ideology of everything we do. The reason it's called decadent drinks is that a little bit of decadence is what often makes life worth living, and I think that should be the case of everything you bottle. I don't like the idea of bottling things that are perhaps, I don't know, too extreme or just too commercial for the sake of it. Or I like there to be something very palpable about the contents of a bottle if we're going to release it that is interesting to try, whether that's something that is interesting just to be simple and pleasurable, or something that will stimulate conversation amongst like-minded friends. All these sorts of things factor into it. So yeah. So yeah, I don't know what else to say about the Bowmore. It's Bowmore. It's lovely. It's lush. It's named, which is good, and it's it's the sort of whiskey I could just sip away all day, really.
We only got 6 bottles, 1 case in. One we divvied up for this tasting, so we're fighting for 5 bottles tonight. I'll let you all have first go before I grab this bottle, because it's and Emma's like, me too. So
this is like me with the Balakin last time, where I was like, well, if it doesn't sell, I'll have to rescue it, right? And then Ollie was like, no, I put one aside for you. I'm like, damn it, now I have to get it.
Angus, how come you have, like, where's the relationship with Sig? Coming from long time workmates or something from the auction houses days, or like where's?
It's just because Andrew is a fan of the Sponge, and I obviously knew of Signatory, and I knew of Andrew. I'd not met him properly. I think I met him for the first time years ago in Paris, like an early Whiskey Live Paris or something. But I went to Edgeardire one day. I was driving up the A9 and thought, I've got some time, I'll stop into Edgeardire. I haven't been for years, just to look at the shop. So I was wandering around the shop, minding my own business, and then I just heard this voice behind me, like, "Are you Angus MacRaild?" And I just thought, oh, my life's over. Someone's very angry with me. And he just said to me, "I'm a big fan of the Sponge, fucking brilliant stuff." And Andrew can swear for Scott. If there was some sort of intergalactic like Olympics for bad language, Andrew would represent planet Earth. I think the first time I introduced my partner Lucy to him at a like Edgeardire Christmas do, within 30 seconds he dropped 3 C-bombs. It was just like Herculean level swearing. Anyway,
so basically a Queenslander.
Yeah. He's
pretty much
right at home here.
Yeah, I could totally see Andrew as, like, I don't know, just like a farmer from Brisbane or something like that in another life. But he was a big fan of the Sponge, and so we just got on well. And then from there, when we started doing bottling, I just said, "Look, would you do third-party bottling, which is allow us to have our own labels?" He said, "Yeah, just put from the Warehouse Signatory Vintage on," which was a godsend to us, because it's meant that we've been able to, get access. And as things have gone on and we've managed to grow our sales channels a bit and have a bit more success or whatever, then we've been able to buy more from them. So they've been very supportive, and that's been amazing for us. It's a great relationship to have, and obviously I don't think we've been able to do half the stuff we've done if we didn't have access to that stock. So yeah, very lucky. And it's just purely because Andrew has a good sense of humor. So, yeah. Yeah. So
I was about to say we should jump onto the Caol Ilas, but one quick question. Your Bessie's dram, I think is like we've shared a few of them. I'm trying to buy more because that is one of my favorite Lafroigs in a long time. And there's a small group of us who go through a lot of IB at Lafroigs, but that one stands on its own.
Yeah, those batches are amazing. Like that's all ex-Allied Distillers blending stock, and it's all listed as Islay single malt whiskey, and they were all vatted. So I'm pretty sure, I don't know what company all that stock originally came from. That people seem to think William Grant's perhaps. I know that some of it came from Ian MacLeod, but Signatory bought a bunch of it, and it's all so I've seen the barrels, the ex-Allied Distillers painted end barrels. So Allied Distillers used to color code the end of their barrels. These are all blue ends, which was fourth fill. So really like pretty naked wood. And what would have happened is that these were all dumped into a huge vatting tank. You know, I don't know how many casks, and I don't know how many batches they'd have done, but there's multiple vintages from 89 all the way through to 92. And you've seen them at other bottlers as well, these batches. It's all the same original one huge parcel of stock. And this goes back to what we discussed about Jura, for example. Like someone decided to sell an enormous parcel of stock, and now it's, you know, gone through all these different companies, and we've had access to it, bits and pieces of it along the way. So it's all been vatted and then recast into these the very plain oak refill barrels. And there's no way to know for sure that it's Lafroig. And in fact, our first bottling of it, edition 17, so Ila, the one that was sort of basically just ripping off a Magritte painting, this is not a fake, this is not on pipe, whatever it was. So that bottling tasted almost sometimes more like Ardbeg to me, but it can only really be Ardbeg or Lafroig from Allied Distillers, and it tastes to me, almost all the casks taste to me like Lafroig. So pretty sure it's Lafroig, but I agree, quality is very high. And we've got more coming. We've got a 1990 single cask coming this month. And then we've got access to a few more casks of it, which I don't know what we're going to do, but we'll do something with them over the course of the next year or so, I imagine. But the quality is beautiful, I agree. And that 92 I was very happy with. So yeah, that was, just 2 refill barrels bundled together at cask strength. And I think, luscious, dry, slightly fruity, very coastal, pure Lafroig, gorgeous stuff.
I'll put Australia's order with Ian in tonight.
Yeah, no, I mean, unfortunately, the prices are going up now. But as it is with 30-year-old Islay single malt, it's not cheap. But the quality is beautiful, and it's the perfect sort of maturation profile for that kind of distillate, I think, which is just light touch wood and a long time, and it just sings really beautifully.
We got one question for you from Keenan. If you haven't poured your Caol Ilas yet in your glass, grab 2 glasses, I think maybe side by side, so edition 54 and 55. We'll get to it in a second. Keenan asks, what's your favorite sponge release, and is it whether due to quality or just the story behind it or anything?
So I suppose my favorite, so there's a couple of answers. I mean, my favorite changes a bit actually, but there's a couple of answers to that. So one of them is, in terms of just quality and like excitement, was when we did our first cognac, which was a 1945 75-year-old Fambois cognac. I went to see Guillaume Gros-Perrin in Santes in France, and Gros-Perrin have great stocks of cognac, and I knew him already, so this was an obvious route for us to start doing cognac. So I had a meeting with him and said, look, I'm going to do Cognac Sponge edition 1. I'd like it to be something special. Now, if you go to somewhere like, a whiskey supplier, say, have you got anything special? Say, well, how about some 30-year-old grain whiskey, whatever. And can we get samples? No, can't get samples. No. And then you go to Guillaume and he says, you want something special? What about a 1945, 75-year-old Fambois? So, right, so a cognac that's equal at that point to the oldest whiskey ever bottled, which had been like 25 grand a bottle when it was released by G&M. and said, yeah, this one we can do you for maybe 245 euros, so you can release for £450. It's like, okay, yeah, I agree. That sounds quite an attractive proposition. Thank you. I said, do we have to take the whole cask? He said, no, you can just take whatever you want. It's like, okay. It just, and can I have a sample? Yes, I send you sample. A half bottle arrived in the post of 75-year-old cognac, along with 3 other half bottles of things he thought I should try. 1964, 1942, 1957 or something like that. So it's just insane. I keep saying this, I'll say it to you guys as well. Cognac and Armagnac, if you want aged, beautiful, complex, elegant spirits, which share a lot in common with things like old rums or particularly old Speyside malt whiskies, Glen Grant, Strathila, Linkwood, that kind of characteristic, check out these bottlings because they are stunning. We've got 3 new things coming up: 1972 Armagnac, 1972 Grand Champagne Cognac, and a 28-year-old Framboise Cognac, all of which are just exquisite and compared to whiskey of those vintages, dirt cheap. So I would recommend that you check out that world if you're into that kind of these kind of characteristics and styles. Favorite whiskey, probably our first Equilibrium bottling, because so we have this 10-year-old Equilibrium was our first bottling, and because it was probably the most ambitious thing we'd done at that point in terms of creating a whiskey ourselves, or me like trying to create a whiskey with an idea or concept in mind. So it was, how can we make sherry and peat flavor profile, but taking a different route to get there? And I thought, because we have this good relationship with Signatory, why don't we just utilize the Edredar stocks? Because they make Belechin, this really great peaty single malt, and they have Edredar, which is often great as well. And I love Edredar. I think they make very good whiskey there. Nowadays, they didn't used to. It used to be like the most atrocious satanic soap bomb imaginable. So they've really improved it since they bought it over. So yeah, I thought this was an experiment in a lot of ways, in that let's make sherry and peat, but we chose to mix a 2003 refill hogshead of Belechin. So a part of the whiskey is much older, 17 years, with a 2010 first fill sherry butt of Edredar. And the balance, the resulting whiskey is great. I really like the whiskey. We managed to sell it also, technically a success. And a lot of the feedback has been great. I continually get people come to me and say they really like this whiskey. So that made me really happy. So although I don't think it's the best whiskey we bottled, I suppose personally, in terms of what I consider to be like creatively and commercially a success, this was a really satisfying bottling to do. We've got the sequel just now, which is a Equilibrium 2, and that's a 16-year-old, and I've taken a different approach with this one. This is a refill, so a second fill sherry hogshead of Belechin 05 and a second fill sherry hogshead of Edredar 05. So it's all 2005, all 16 years old, and all second fill sherry. So it's taking a different approach to the same recipe, and I think it's very interesting to try them side by side. So yeah, that one is on the website just now if any of you want to have a crack at it.
Our allocation arrived today, so I've put that up.
So
you guys will have access in 5 minutes time.
Cool.
Let's
Caol Ila's, yes. So 2003 Caol Ila. The story behind these ones is I was just in the warehouse with the manager at Edredar, a guy called Des. And the way we do things there and pick bottlings is that we'll just walk through the warehouse and I'll see casks and think, is that available to us? And Des, being this quite scary Northern Irish guy, will usually say, out of the question. And sometimes he'll say, well, I suppose we could do a price. So on this occasion, there are these 2 hogsheads of 2003 Caol Ila, and I thought, can I just sample both of them and pick one? He's like, well, I suppose so. So I got samples of both, and I just thought, these are both really beautiful, and they are subtly different enough. Like, could we just do them both? Would that be possible? So yeah, decided to do both, and that was what inspired the idea behind the labels. So you'll see the sort of the design as a pair, and this meant to be this kind of subtle. The idea is subtle difference, and one being slightly more coastal, one being slightly more wood driven. The problem is that because we don't do cask numbers, and because I possibly rather foolishly decided to have these both bottled at 53%. We got, you know, some way down the line, past the point of bottling, I lost track of which cask was which. So now all I've got to go on is, what do they actually taste like? And I can't remember which cask number corresponds to which edition number, but it doesn't really matter, because I just think the concept works, and I'm quite happy with how it turned out, which is everything about them is pretty uniform. They're both refill hogsheads. They've both been bottled at 53%. They were filled a few months apart, but so they're not quite sister casks, but they're both 18 years old, and they both had the same maturation environment. So there's a lot of uniformity about them. So really it's about having them in your glass side by side and just enjoying nosing and tasting and finding the differences. And everyone I've done this with has a different favorite, which is really cool, because that's what I wanted this pair to be about, which was subtle difference and celebrating nuance in whiskey. So, I mean, I say that it's just an excuse to have a concept that that means we could bottle 2 casks of Caol Ila instead of just 1. So, yeah, I think they're lovely. I really, I like young Caol Ila, but really, when it gets up to this kind of age, like 18 years old, it's such a sweet spot for that distillate. And it just, you know, there's a little bit more richness from that refill wood, from that time it's spent in there. So there's just a little more concentration and a little more syrupiness and thickness, but you still get all that traditional freshness. Like you can still nose and taste and think, well, I could be on the pier at Port Ascog with my eyes closed. This is lovely. Goes back to what I was saying at the start about this kind of evocative whiskey. So yeah. Oh wow. Okay, there's polls. So
I've just chucked a poll up, but I'm not going to. People give time to just to analyze it. James has said he takes a 54 over the 55. I've just seen Leo comment 55 over the 54. Keenan's 54. Jacob 54.
Looks like the 54s are winning at the moment. I see why. They're obviously so similar but so different as well, and they are like two sides of that Caol Ila flavor character coin, like the vanilla on fire and the grilled sardines, kind of two sides that I always get in flavor profile.
Yeah, and again, this was the reason I chose to do targeted reduction on these is, again, I wanted to try and uniform them a little bit, but also both casks, the differences got a little bit more elevated once the water was added. I mean, the cask strength on both of these was between 55 and 57, so it wasn't a huge reduction really. It's quite nice that to see the Jura performing well in this poll. I'm pleased about that. I think the Jura is damning whiskey. It's just, it goes back to, you know, the problems we have is that a problem every bottler has now. If you want to do named single malts of a certain age, you have to release expensive bottlings, or your prices have to be of a certain level, which is a bit painful because, you know, could I afford to buy our own bottlings all the time? Absolutely not. But do I want to just put out cheap whiskey for the sake of it and work with not very interesting whiskies? No, I'm in this game to work with whiskies that I love and products that I love. And so the compromise you accept is that the market reality is what it is, and you have to work with slightly more expensive products. Having said that, you know, I think there's still lots of, like, this to me, going back to the Pulteney, part of what I find very satisfying about this is when you're able to find stock like this and put it out at a price which I think is much more accessible for a lot of people and more attractive, and the quality is still high. And, you know, that to me is part of the game of modern whiskey bottling, is trying to find good whiskies under £100. It's much harder than finding really good whiskies around the £200 mark. You know, that's, I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's easier if you're accepting that kind of price point and outlay. But finding under £100 now is really tough. Finding good quality. You know, you can bottle, you know, boring things that, or you know, you're competing with companies that are set up and designed to do very good, like, young whiskies, and they have they have their own warehouse in place. They've got programs with cask re-racking and wood technology which create like very good, quite modern whiskies. But we're not set up to compete with that. You know, I can't just put out a 8-year-old Macduff from a refill barrel and hope that everyone's going to sing its praises, because it'll probably be quite boring. most modern whiskies are reasonably homogenized and a bit boring. That's why cask technology exists, to create difference.
Do we have,
yeah.
Do we have time for one more question, or you got to run?
Yeah, no, fine. I mean, I can spend a few more minutes, absolutely. Yeah, if any questions, fire them on.
I'm loving the 54s. Personally, because Ian reached out a few weeks ago. Ian's Angus's business partner, who runs, Angus does the whiskey, Ian does the business side of it. He said one of your international markets couldn't take their allocation of this Caol Ila. Do you want it? And we said, hell yeah. Because we got our Friends of the Face official show happening in Melbourne in June 4th. First time, so we've secured the rights for that. But we said, can we have any Ilas? And he said, oh, you can have this one. This is extra allocation. So we've got plenty of 54 available tonight to buy. The old Pulteney, if you buy a bottle of that, you get 10% off the other sponges as well, as an extra little kick in there for everyone who's taken the time to spend an hour with Angus tonight listening to him rambling on about a couple of whiskies here.
I definitely do rambling. That's my main talent, is rambling. So yeah, thank you very much for joining, and thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to do these tastings and to talk to you guys, and I'm always very happy to see that there's people in such far-flung parts of the world that are enjoying what we do. So yeah, thank you. Hopefully I'll be able to visit one day and we could do this in person, and maybe time it so that I won't be unconscious from jet lag. But yeah, we'll
definitely get you here in time. If there's no other questions, I might call it a night. I'll share the link, so if everyone just stays on, don't run away. We'll just officially bid Angus farewell, and we'll see you at the next virtual tasting, no doubt.
Yeah, I'm happy to do these fairly regularly. Just drop me a line. I'll happily come back and ramble at you a bit more with some different bottlings. But yeah, thanks everyone, and yeah, I'll see you all again soon. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Angus.
Cheers, Angus.